Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Freshman English, and we now turn in our hymnals to page 652, 653 and following. We are now into the poetry collection number 4, as your textbook anthologizers created, and we're going to look at 3 poets. The first of those 3 is Edgar Allan Poe, and we're going to look at his classic tale, the classic poem, The Bells. The big question is emphasized again: how does communication change us? And the vocabulary words there will help you as you begin to work through this. Notice on 652 the word study with the Greek prefix of mono, which means one. In the bells, the speaker describes the muffled monotone of certain bells. He refers to a kind of ringing that has only one tone or pitch that repeats without changing. Speaking of Poe, that's where we're headed. Edgar Allan Poe, and we've already met Poe, of course, with the Cask of Amontillado in an earlier text. Let's talk about now Poe from a different perspective. As poems like The Bells illustrates, Edgar Allan Poe is a master at using rhythm and sound devices to powerful effect. Many scholars believe that the idea of the bells was suggested to Poe by Marie Louise Schuh, a woman with medical training who treated Poe when his health began to fail. Some have also suggested that there's a huge relationship between Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame in Quasimodo and this famous poem, The Bells. Now, 2 things about this poem. Look at it with me on 655. The first thing I want to point out is, notice that the poem is divided up into Roman numerals. Do you see this? So, I'm hoping that you kind of scan through the poem and see it's a poem of 4 parts. Do you see that? It's a little bit longer than some of the poems we've been looking at. A poem of 4 parts. The second thing I want to point out here is that this is a poem where we will definitely emphasize the power of 2 things. Write it down. Rhythm and sound, okay? Rhythm and sound. Both of these are going to be really important in our study of the poem. But remember what we said. It's the what is it and how does it work? How does this poem start to either attract you or annoy you? Let's say this out loud. This is a poem which may by design be intended to actually potentially annoy you. Bug you might be a better way to say it. All of the bells. Now, I should point out, we don't live today in a world that so much lives by and with bells. Today it might be your ringtone on your smartphone. Some people really get into this, right? Where whatever their ringtone is matters for them because the ringtone tells them important information. Put this in your notes. There is a whole history of civilization that's understood through bells. Of course, our most famous bell is the Liberty Bell, isn't it, in Philadelphia, right? But in Europe, a little bit less in America, but in Europe, all over Europe, churches have these bells that will ring. And these can be huge bells. Like there are bells that are bigger than this entire room from ceiling to floor in Europe, in cathedrals. And those cathedrals can go up 100, 200 feet into the air, and these huge bells are there, and they will then go off. The bells in Europe are a way to keep time of the day. And people didn't have watches and timepieces. And so the way they knew when it was time was they could hear the bells going off. Of course, the bells also would call many churchgoers to church or to Mass. And so the bells are something more common a while ago than they are today. All right, let's go ahead now. We'll pay attention. We'll just enjoy this text, The Bells, and see how well we do.
The Bells by Edgar Allan Poe. Hear the sledges with the bells, silver bells. What a world of merriment their melody foretells. How they tinkle, tinkle, tinkle in the icy air of night, while the stars that oversprinkle all the heavens seem to twinkle with a crystalline delight, keeping time, time, time in a sort of runic rhyme to the tintinnabulation that so musically wells from the bells, 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 from the jingling and the tinkling of the bells. Hear the mellow wedding bells, golden bells. What a world of happiness their harmony foretells. Through the balmy air of night, how they ring out their delight, from the molten golden notes, and all in tune.
Top of 656.
What a liquid ditty floats to the turtle dove that listens while she gloats on the moon. Oh, from out the sounding cells, what a gush of euphony voluminously wells. How it swells, how it dwells on the future, how it tells of the rapture that impels to the swinging and the ringing of the bells, 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 of the bells, 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 to the rhyming and the chiming of the bells. Hear the loud alarum bells, brazen bells. What a tale of terror now their turbulency tells. In the startled ear of night, how they scream out their affright. Too much horrified to speak, they can only shriek, shriek, out of tune. In a clamorous appealing to the mercy of the fire. In a mad expostulation with the deaf and frantic fire. Leaping higher, 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 with a desperate desire. And a resolute endeavor now to sit or never by the side of the pale-faced moon. Oh, the bells, 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 what a tale their terror tells of despair. How they clang and clash and roar. What a horror they outpour on the bosom of the palpitating air. Yet the ear it fully knows, by the twanging and the clanging, how the danger ebbs and flows. Yet the ear distinctly tells, in the jangling and the wrangling, how the danger sinks and swells, by the sinking or the swelling in the anger of the bells, of the bells, of the bells, 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 in the clamor and the clangor of the bells. Hear the tolling of the bells, iron bells. What a world of solemn thought their monody compels. In the silence of the night, how we shiver with affright at the melancholy menace of their tone. For every sound that floats from the rust within their throats is a groan. And the people, the people, they that dwell up in the steeple all alone, and who tolling, tolling, tolling in that muffled monotone, feel a glory in so rolling on the human heart a stone. They are neither man nor woman. They are neither brute nor human. They are ghouls. And their king it is who tolls, and he rolls, 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 rolls a paean from the bells, and his merry bosom swells with the paean of the bells. And he dances and he yells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the paean of the bells, keeping time, 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 in a sort of runic rhyme to the throbbing of the bells, 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 to the sobbing of the bells, keeping time, 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 as he knells, 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 in a happy runic rhyme to the rolling of the bells, 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 to the tolling of the bells, 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 to the moaning and the groaning of the bells.
Okay, let's talk about this poem. Can I just say this out loud? Let's say two things right away. One, you've probably never read a poem like that one before. You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, dude, a lot of these poems we've been doing, they're kind of similar, they kind of, yeah, and then all of a sudden you do this poem and you're just like, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, number two, there are many people who say that Edgar Allan Poe killed rhyme in poetry. And after Poe, because he did it so brilliantly, and he did it so fastidiously, powerfully, that after Poe, in the modern poetic tradition and the postmodern poetic tradition, you just don't do much with rhyme anymore. So that rhyme starts to look and sound kind of childlike and sophomoric, and sometimes even people like Mr. McGee, English teachers, will say, why don't you stay away from rhyme and why don't you just go ahead and write really powerful poetry? Think about how few poems we've studied to this point are poems that emphasize rhyming. And yet here we're going to have it, okay, in spades, we might say, right? But I want to point out something about this poem now at level 1. So let's work through this really quickly. I've had students that say, this really is nothing more than the word bells repeated over and over again. No, 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 no. Let's not be immature, unsophisticated readers of this poem. Let's go to work with this poem, and let's point out right away, Poe is giving you a heads up by giving you Roman numerals 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now it's possible, because it's only your first looking at the poem, that you missed it, so let me help you out. Look on page 655. In part 1 of this poem, the emphasis is on a sleigh with bells on the sleigh that's going through on its way, maybe Christmas time, right? And there's all kinds of excitement about being on the sleigh with the bells. Look down below, part 2. The bells, specifically, wedding bells. Oh, wait a second. We got different bells for different times of life, different occasions. Now, some of you are already flipping now to look at number 3, and you're going, wait, 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 what's number 3 about then? Well, 656. Number 3, hear the alarm bells, brazen bells. What a tale of terror now their turbulency tells. Now, of course, for those of us who know American history, we know about the ride of Paul Revere. And we know how bells have something to do with the Revolutionary War. Bells were often rung in towns if there was an enemy approaching. That was a special bell, and when that bell went off, people knew something terrible might be about to happen. By the way, we play this game today. Think of it. Even in our town, if a certain alarm goes off and it won't stop, and it keeps going, it tells you something bad is about to happen. It might be an act of nature, like a tornado or something, and when you hear that thing going off, right? Or some of my students have said, I get a really freaky feeling when the fire alarm goes off in school. Even though if I know, like, okay, this is like a drill, right? It's not like the real thing. I still get kind of freaked out. That's part 3. That's the bells that kind of makes your heart beat a little bit different, because you're like, okay, I'm getting freaked out. What's going on? That's the bells. And then finally at number 4 on 657, well, this is the tolling of the bells. Iron bells. What a world of solemn thought their monody compels. A monody, as your footnote tells you, is a poem of mourning. In other words, what's the final bells? The bells of death. So note the genius of this. We start with bells that are, yay, it's Christmas time on the sled. Then it's weddings, yay, weddings. Then it's part 3, scary bells, war, oh no, we're bad guys coming. To finally, the bells of death. Why? Because when someone is buried in the church, they would ring the bells. Of course, each one of these a different emphasis. With that in mind then, at level 1, now that you know that, let's write Roman numeral 1, 2, 3, and 4, and let's just concentrate now quickly at level 1 and 2, specifically for each one of these. Notice in the first one, the sleds with the bells, silver bells, foretells merriment, right? We're happy, musically wells, and then the repetition of bells, 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 over and over again. Of course, this is kind of like poetic onomatopoeia of a type, right? Where the repetition of the word bells is kind of like what a bell does when it goes off over and over and over again. Part 1, emphasizing joy, right? Part 2, seasonal joy. Part 2, wedding bells, golden bells, a world of happiness. Their harmony foretells. This will, by the way, set up the disharmony, the discordant tones of part 3 and the army, the war alarms and all of that, right? A gush of euphony voluminously wells, that the beautiful sounds that elongates, and it's all about weddings and happiness, and the rapture that impels. The future, everything's looking forward, excited, excited. Part 3, well, this is the alarm bells, a tale of terror. Notice they can only shriek, shriek, out of tune, of despair. A tale of their terror tells of despair. Now, for those of you that know your Edgar Allan Poe, you had to know that he would get around to the scary, and then, of course, at the very end, part 4, death. Right, if it's Poe, we're going to get around to the macabre. We're going to get around to death. And the ways in which bells play a role as well in the end of our life, right? At the beginning of our life, when we're children and we're, yay, happy about Christmas. In the middle of our life, in terms of weddings, and of course the concern about wars and the attacks. And then finally, death. On page 659, you knew the word was coming. 659, third line down, at the melancholy menace of their tone. The groan, tone, groan. Their groan, and the people, the people, they that dwell up in the steeple all alone. Of course, steeple here being not literal, but metaphoric. All of the people who are trying to somehow pretend like death is not going to come for them. And then, of course, they hear the bell, and then, of course, here we think immediately at level 3A of John Donne's classic that you'll study in your senior year, Meditation 17. Do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. The idea is that on a cart in Europe, during especially the Middle Ages and the pestilence, they would bring out the dead and put them on a cart, and the guy who pulled the cart through the town rang a bell so that everybody would stay away from the cart. And anytime you heard the bell, it's kind of like hearing the siren of the ambulance. And you go, well, I wonder who got jacked. Donne will say, we're all somehow together in that, wondering about who died. The throbbing, the sobbing of the bells, the sadness. All right, well, let's finish at level 2 and 3 quickly now. Okay, so for you, what's the primary message? Notice the genius of this poem. There are messages here without them actually being said. Life is all about the bells. Life is all about the sounds, right? Sometimes happy, sometimes scary, sometimes sad. Life is about a process. And the same bells, notice the irony, the same bells that can make you happy in one occasion can make you scared in another occasion and really sad in a third occasion. In other words, another message, life is all about perspective. And one thing that seems happy later in your life can actually maybe be sad, the bells. Now, the genius of sound, I'll just ask you, what is your favorite moment in this poem? Can I say this? What is the moment that drives you the most nuts? Is it the repetition of the bells, the bells, the bells? Of course, at level 3A, we think about Quasimodo and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Quasimodo, of course, ringing those bells, and as they go off, of course, they can really mess with him, the bells, the bells. At level 3B, we can ask, at level 3A, we can ask your own personal view of this. What is for you a text that has a tendency, when you listen to it the first time, it kind of bugged you or got under your skin, the way this poem can, but then you listen to it again and again. There are actually people who actually really love this poem, no kidding. They love that repetition of the bells, the bells, the bells. It doesn't get under their skin. Is there a song like that for you, that you actually, when you heard it for the very first time, you didn't like it? And then you listen to it again, and then you listen to it a few more times, and then you kind of grew to like it? Is there a poem or a song like that for you that captures you in some way? Finally, at 3B, what are the bells of your life? Watch this, watch this. What's the bell or sound you hate the most? Watch. What's the bell or sound you hate the most? For many high school students, it's the one that wakes them in the morning if they've got to wake up to an alarm. Okay? Watch this. The same sound can be for you the source of despair and the source of incredible adulation. Watch this. The first bell of the day in school, crap, I'm late again, I'm tardy. No, the last bell is the same exact sound, and yet the last bell of the day is your freedom. It's the exact same sound, and it's heard in two radically different ways. Isn't that fascinating? In other words, Poe is wanting to remind you of the ways in which your life is somehow controlled by bells, interpreted by bells, or sounds. Right? Well, there you go, an introduction to the classic Edgar Allan Poe poem, The Bells. Thank you.